Right, if that was a game of musical chairs, I think we all lost, so apologies for that. But welcome back, Sustainability Live London 2025, and thank you for returning so promptly from lunch. Today, an amazing thing has happened. I actually got lunch. Normally at events, the session finishes, you make your way across the room, and you're in the line for sandwiches, and you never get to the front. But today I got lunch, so I'm on absolute cloud nine. I'm also on cloud nine because we have a guest moderator for the next session, so I get to sit back like you and take it all in. So let me introduce the panel for this, the Future of the Energy Transition, sponsored by HSBC. Our guests are, starting at the far side, we are joined by Abbie Babcock Broe, Head of Corporate UK and Decarbonisation Strategy at National Grid. Also joining us, Saleh ElHattab, CEO at Gravity. Also with us, Andrew Toher, Director, Energy Advisory at Enel. Our guest moderator is Dr. Ingunn Gunnarsdóttir, Leader of Innovation at On Power. And also with us, Tim Lord, Head of Climate and Energy at HSBC UK. And I'm going to pass on to Ingunn now because she will do a considerably better job than I just did as the host. So I will pass over to the panel. A warm welcome to our guests, please.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for being here. And welcome to this, I think is a very exciting session. I want to start by having you guys say more than just your name and company, and start on the far end.
Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. As the photo already says, I don't need to repeat that, but my role in National Grid is really to help our senior leaders in establishing our short, medium and long-term strategy for us as a business. For those of you who aren't quite so familiar, National Grid operates across 2 jurisdictions, so here in the UK, across England and Wales. We are the transmission operator. We're also an owner of one of the distribution companies, which operates across the southwest, half of Wales and the Midlands. We also have 6 interconnectors that connects the UK across to mainland Europe, so helps us with our surplus supply and demand for renewables. And then we also operate in the northeast of America. So that's over in Massachusetts and also in New York State, of where we have both gas and electricity infrastructure, as well as we supply to domestic customers, about 6 million of them.
And Saleh, do you want to introduce your company a bit and yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Saleh. I'm the CEO and founder at Gravity. Gravity operates in the completely uncrowded space of carbon management and energy management. I would say our unique bent on it is that we decided to focus on the energy intense, and if that's still not a small enough niche, kind of rather than ending with reports or carbon offsets, we wanted to actually facilitate projects. So we have energy engineers on staff, and in addition to automating the disclosure process, we'll actually find cost-saving projects that we can show up and actually facilitate the execution of. A lot of this was born out of an anticipation of some economic and political oscillation that we have now seen, and we wanted to find something that would be weather-proof and future-proof, something that spoke dollars and cents, which is hard to politically argue with, and it's been quite fruitful. We're largely based out of the US with a growing footprint here in London and in Barcelona, and just because you said more than just our company and ourselves, I have a dog named Nora, if that's in any way relevant. But thank you guys so much for coming.
Andrew?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm here as part of the Enel group, the large Italian conglomerate, but I'm specifically here from the advisory services unit. So we work with corporate C&I customers, a lot of manufacturing businesses, and we are an energy and sustainability advisory firm. So we're helping these customers build out their emissions inventories and report on energy usage across the globe, but also design kind of strategies and roadmaps to help them manage the purchasing of their energy globally, and of course decarbonizing that energy. So we've got advisors across the globe, in North America, in Latin America, across the APAC region, and relevant to my role, a team based across Europe. Delighted to be part of the session and looking forward to digging into the topic in more detail.
Thank you. Last but not least.
Yeah,
Tim?
hi everyone. Great to be here. Even better to be sitting down, actually. I was at an event in Westminster this morning, ended up walking here, so delighted to have a seat. So I lead our work on climate and energy here in the UK, working very closely with a large team of people focused on how we support our clients in the UK in decarbonising. HSBC is in about 60 markets globally, so we work with clients right across the transition, very different stages of the transition and of all different sizes. So everything from retail clients thinking about heat pumps or EVs, through businesses of all sizes. We're obviously a really big banker of innovation clients in the UK with HSBC Innovation Banking, and also investing in large energy infrastructure. So a really big role globally, and in particular here in the UK.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. A bit about myself. I'm the leader of innovation at On Power, which is the second largest energy company in Iceland and the largest geothermal energy generator. And we also have the geothermal park, which is where we cascade the use of geothermal and try to create even more value. And perhaps something that I want to add is Iceland is tiny, as most of you probably know, but we've already undergone 2 energy transitions. We already have 100% renewable electricity, and we have almost 100% renewable district heating, or 80%. So what's left for us is just transportation and basically our fishing fleet. We're a fishing nation. So I think that's quite remarkable. We sometimes forget that we're in a very luxurious position, but yeah. Anyway, Tim, why is it so critical for us to be looking ahead to the future, and what role does HSBC and the financial sector overall play in the future of the energy transition?
Sure, thank you. So I guess looking ahead to the future, I've been working in energy for, I guess, best part of, well, a bit over 20 years now. And the main thing I've learned is trying to predict the future is a bit of a mug's game. If I think back to when I was at school, my first textbook told me, this probably says something about school funding in the UK in the 80s and 90s, but it was quite an old textbook. And what it said was that we were going to run out of fossil fuels by the year 2000. So that's what we should be worried about in terms of energy transition. If I fast forward to my first job after I left university, I joined the civil service, and I had a very small role on the energy white paper that the Blair government published in 2003, so only 20 years ago. And some bits of that hold up quite well, but one of the things it says is that, at that time we were getting, I think, 3% of our electricity from renewables, and it was even conceivable that we could be getting as much as 30 to 40% of our electricity from renewables by 2050. And as many of you will know in the audience, we're now past 50% of our electricity coming from renewables in 2024. So you can see that kind of making predictions is a bit of a mug's game. Having said that, I'm now going to make a couple of predictions, and you can draw your own conclusions. But I guess there are some things we can be pretty confident on, right? One is, I think we underestimate what a seismic shift is that we're going through in terms of electrification. If we think just in the UK, we're using about the same amount of electricity in the UK now as we were when I was reading that textbook back in the 1980s. We're actually using quite a lot less than we were when that white paper came out in 2003. But when we look at the next 25 years, we're going to need 2 to 3, maybe even more than that, times electricity than we have now. And that's just in a developed economy with a growth rate of a couple of % a year. When we look globally, a huge and really fundamental seismic shift in terms of electrification. I think the second thing we can be confident about is a few years ago, people said that the trilemma is finished. The trilemma of cost versus security versus decarbonisation. You can only have 2 out of the 3. People said, we're moving past that now. Globally integrated markets mean the security problem is solved, all that kind of thing. I think the last few years have proven that isn't the case, and those 3 challenges are absolutely going to remain. And then the third thing I'd say is this is a hugely investment-heavy transition. Just the markets we operate in globally, we think there's about 155 trillion of capital investment needed in order to decarbonise to 2050. And that's just in 60 economies globally. When you look right across the world, even higher than that. So in terms of what HSBC and the finance sector can do, I guess 3 things I'd highlight very briefly. One is supporting that investment, so enabling access to capital, enabling the capital to flow to where it needs to, thinking about the way that we do that, because some of these projects are much more capital intensive than their fossil fuel alternatives. Secondly, how we help clients navigate that transition. It's very complex. It's not just about energy companies, it's about the whole economy. It's about every household. So how do we help people to do that? And I think the third thing is about connectivity. You know, there are some organizations that have the privilege of working right across the economy, and how do we connect the innovators to the large corporate clients? How do we connect the people needing finance to the people who might buy those products? And hopefully we can provide that finance. And I think by doing those things, we can play a big role.
Great. Do you guys want to add anything? Why do we need to look towards the future with energy transition? What are the big drivers?
I think for me, and my context is very much working with large C&I consumers. I echo everything that Tim said there. I think we're in an interesting point in the market, though. We're seeing a real kind of divergence. I mean, in terms of drivers, the regulatory environment is a significant driver, and we're seeing somewhat of a divergence, right, between what's happening in the US versus Europe. In the USA, we've got this kind of rollback from some of the legislation that supported renewables. In Europe, to an extent, that's happening, less so, still pushing forwards. But for those large corporates that are working with manufacturing facilities across multiple geographies, they're trying to navigate now, some very different regulatory landscapes, and I think that's a challenge. But still, what we see in the market is the companies that are very strategic, that are really looking long term in the future, at staying on the path and pushing forwards with their plans. Mm-hmm. Maybe just talking about it a bit less. But that's one thing I would add.
I can't believe you would comment on the US's regressive policy.
Getting there.
Unbelievable.
Wanted to get in.
No, maybe not as a foil, but a compliment to what Tim said. There's a lot that's happening from an electrification perspective, and when we look at the future, of course, consumption is only going to go up, but I also think about Javon's paradox, which is kind of a commentary about how as efficiency goes up, consumption goes up with it, right? Like the internet got faster, we watch 1 trillion videos a day now. And so I would say to complement the fact that we're consuming more and we're switching to new resources, often when we talk about decarbonization or the transition, we forget about the low-hanging fruit, energy efficiency wins. And when I think about the US alone, there's $2 trillion of inefficient energy consumption every year. That's literally just money wasted. And so in addition to that kind of macro transition, which hopefully we'll all be on the right track for over the next couple decades, incremental wins that each corporation can do that aligns with its business is something that isn't that long-term future, short-term future, that also just makes it a lot more bite-sized for those who are either reticent or are less influencing on the more macro changes.
And then to add to that, I would say National Grid has afforded a bit of a privilege. So as the transmission operator here in the UK, we've basically been, in the UK, as UK citizens, benefiting from a huge amount of infrastructure that was built back in the 1950s with very little need to actually change that. Now we have sweat those assets for a very long time. We are needing to build, and we are building fast and at pace. And that is a staggering amount that is needed to help prepare us for the remainder of this century. So what we are doing when we're looking at retiring some assets which are sort of coming up to 70, 80 years, and across both UK and US, is really thinking, how do we make sure that we build that infrastructure for the long term? So that in some ways gives us a slightly different perspective perhaps than those, and I still work in strategy, so I'm thinking about all these current events, are perhaps a little bit nervous around, some of the recent changes we've seen unfold in the last sort of 9 months or so. But I think some of the drivers are still the same, right? We are needing to go through, coming back to the earlier point, and I remember the same thing about peak oil and what was that all going to mean. We do realize now that we are living through a society in an era where climate-related events are actually impacting us in every environment. So we need to have much more resilient ways of being able to future-proof ourselves. Our economy is built on electricity, and we need to make sure that we can still grow and develop in the future. That means that it's about how do we build new infrastructure, but how do we make that infrastructure work smarter for us, better, more efficient, better related data, better flexibility as well, so that we can pass on savings to consumers. And then it's also thinking, what does the future environment need to look like? So, we do a lot of protection of our assets, our substations, and thinking about, what's going to happen from floods and, more heat waves and things of those sort of connotations. So it always comes back to the energy trilemma. It's always going to be a sort of a swing of the pendulum. And at the moment, it does feel like that pendulum has shifted, especially from sort of the glory days of May 2024 with, Labour coming in with their very bold and ambitious plans. So actually saying we want to very ambitiously, as far as, national countries outside of maybe Iceland, commit to 95% of clean energy in our electricity system by 2030. That's quite significant, and that requires quite a lot of those infrastructure projects or offshore wind projects to be accelerated to be able to make that happen. So a lot of the time what we're talking about is short-term and long-term trade-offs whilst we're trying to get the balance. And we've actually had quite a great success story, National Grid, in 2024. We actually did a rights issue. And we did a restructuring of our portfolio of businesses. We used to have a renewable business, we used to have an LNG business, all of those have been sold, and also our gas business. But we managed to raise £7 billion off the stock exchange from investors because we have committed to a £60 billion investment for the next 5 years, which is heavily regulated, right? We are a monopoly business, we operate as a monopoly business in our jurisdictions. So we need to make sure that we have the right level of regulation so that we're not asking customers and consumers to overpay, but so we can also pass on those returns to our private investors. And that is part of the commitment that's needed. So regardless of a lot of the political mongering that's going along, so there's a point of where politics intercepts with legislation, which intercepts with regulation. And it's therefore understanding how can we be afforded those sort of commitments. And we have our commitments that we put forward in our transmission plan, which is actually going to be finalised later on this year, and then also what that means for our distribution business here in the UK, and then our rate cases over in the northeast of the States.
So both Andrew and you, Abbie, commented on regulation. How big a role does regulation play in this energy transition story, and what can governments do to push it forward? Tim?
So I think regulation absolutely does play a huge role in terms of, when we look at where the decarbonisation story started. A lot of that was about regulatory changes, driving deployment of renewables or decarbonisation of transport or whatever it might be. So I think a couple of things I would say. One is that cost and regulation interplay with one another a huge amount. Right? When we think about, say, the rules around EVs purchases in the UK, I think when this is still when I was in government back in 2017 or 2018, the UK said, right, we're going to ban the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles by 2040. When you look at what happened in costs on the few years after that, that was then moved forward to 2035 and then to 2030. So, the key thing is if you can make this stuff make economic and commercial sense, and if you can make it a compelling consumer proposition, then it makes regulation much more straightforward. I think the second thing is often, we think about regulation as what we can tell people they have to do or what they can do, what they can't do. I think the other thing that's really important is thinking about how we design markets. A lot of the markets that we're talking about here, in particular the electricity market, were designed for a fundamentally different set of technologies than the set of technologies that we have now, on both the supply side and on the demand side. And I think one of the big challenges, clearly a big challenge in the UK, is around the price of electricity, and has been for some time. Part of that is to do with the fact that what you're trying to do is put a lot of really effective technologies into a market where it doesn't work quite as well. So how can we make sure that markets are designed in a way that is adapted to the technologies that we know we're going to need in the future? And also, how can we do that pretty quickly? We're not used to changing markets really rapidly, but because of decarbonisation, because of the fundamental changes we're going through, we have to be able to do that, I think, much more quickly.
Do you want to add, Andrew? And also, perhaps, if I can add, because you're maybe more on that side, what technology innovation excites you for this transition?
Yeah, in terms of technology, interestingly, I think that a large part of the transition will come from technologies that we have in front of us now, right? Solar, storage, heat pumps. I'm an engineer by background. I'm very excited by heat pumps and what's happening there in that space. I think that it would be remiss to get this far into a panel discussion without mentioning AI, and I think that has the potential to be a real multiplier effect, obviously. In
Kind of the
terms
word
how
of the
we
day, I think. Word of the day.
There you go, right, yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, AI in this context, I think, has the potential to unlock solutions that, around, particularly in the context of grids, how do we manage all of this technology? How do we manage this change, this move to electrification? There's so much to talk about around technology, but being pragmatic, I would bring it back to, without trying to find that kind of eureka solution that doesn't exist now, we just need to figure out how to make the bulk of this work with the technologies that are there in front of us. And around the technology topic, it's encouraging corporates to be prepared to revisit business cases, tech solutions that perhaps didn't make sense only 12 months ago start to come into focus. So we can talk more about that in future in the presentation around how we see successful corporations organized, but maybe on the tech topic it could be interesting to link to grids.
So if I may, another great success story for National Grid is back in 2018 we set up our own corporate venture capital fund, and we have now invested $500 million into 50 different energy startups, and we've also committed another $100 million, this time looking at AI tech. And we've managed to cash out on some of those. They've been really successful, but it's really about those companies that are going to be disruptive and really help with the energy transition, not just for us, but also for other energy companies globally. And a few examples there that we're really excited about. And I work for an engineering company, so when I say we, I do mean the engineering company. Some of you may think that's a very odd thing for Abbie to be saying on a Tuesday afternoon. But one in particular is around dynamic line rating, right? So we're talking about pylons, effectively large cables, wires. It's really expensive to be able to build those, HVDC type cables. But we are therefore expected from a resilience and safety perspective to always monitor them and always have a certain amount of electricity that goes through that. But it's not smart. So by putting sensors on those cables, it means that we can then see, well, what's happening through the change of weather, the change of time, the temperatures on them, and can we actually flow more energy through without necessarily needing to build new cables. That can save a huge amount of investment. We've done a few of those pilots ourselves. We've actually done the largest one over in New York, over in the States. It's not actually happened beforehand. So this is right at the cutting edge of delivering those different types of technologies. Another one is around conductors, how we can actually have different bits of equipment onto our systems and our networks quicker, faster. Same with actually modular substations. So these are things which, again, most people don't really think about, but it does mean that the nuts and bolts of our energy system, our electricity system, can be innovated a lot more. And coming back to that point of regulation, that is really what our regulators are pushing us to do. For us to be able to outperform now and be able to return the investments that our private investors actually want is about really needing to push the innovation funds. And that's hence why we sort of set up this initiative, this venture capital piece, and we're just seeing great success from that. And also the fact that we're then able to build that community. I think we've got a community of over 200 other electricity network companies across the globe now who are now connecting with those different businesses.
Awesome. Thank you. Saleh,
Yeah.
what emerging technology excites you?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, usually I'm the geekiest person on stage, but I think Abbie might outperform me. I usually talk about capacitors. I actually want to start with the regulation question
Yeah,
when it comes to
absolutely.
technology. On the regulation side, just because we're all clearly consultative, and so we think in threes, I'll oversimplify it into three buckets. There's like the mandatory disclosure, and while that's really great for us and it helps us make money, not monopoly money, but makes money, that's not kind of relevant to this moment. I think there's the subsidies that comes from regulation, and there's the like macro mandates where we as a society have to do X% by a certain date. That middle bucket, the subsidy bucket, I think is the one that's mostly in the limelight in the US in particular right now. And for me, actually, I live in a binary where I'd rather there'd be subsidies for a lot of the renewable energies that we want to be able to execute on. But in the absence of that, I'd rather no regulation at all. And I think that's one thing that's often missed when people talk about regulation is that the unsubsidized cost of solar and the unsubsidized cost of wind is more affordable than mixed gas. It's more affordable than coal. It's more affordable than all these things. But in the US, we still have regulation that subsidizes the fuel industries that make it competitive with them. And so for me, actually, regulation is this funky word that often only applies to the world of sustainability. And so when we repeal it, it's bad. But if we actually repealed it all, I think economics would pan out and we'd end up seeing a lot more renewables come online. When it comes to technologies that we're excited about, only because you burst the AI bubble, I think I'm particularly excited about AI being a massive consumer of energy, not because I want all our water and energy to go to waste, but because typically the AI companies at the forefront of consumption are deeper pocketed and more sustainability aligned than the historical energy consumers that operated with razor thin margins and that typically didn't care much about sustainability. Their staff definitely didn't join the company just because they had a corporate disclosure. And so what we're seeing is, even in the US, like whether you have a polarized opinion on nuclear or not, we're kicking up sources of energy that have been completely shut down for decades because we know that AI is going to be consuming so much of it, and they don't want to be the reason why we burn so many more emissions as a society. And so I'm optimistic that not only is AI going to consume, but those who fund it are going to be the ones who are willing to find both rapid deployment of and renewable sources of energy.
Very interesting.
If I may, on
Yeah.
the AI one, that is posing a significant challenge, though. Right. The connections queue that we have in the UK, if I'm going to open that messy bucket, is a contentious issue, right? We had connect and manage, basically first come, first serve. We have a queue that outstrips the entire demand that we would ever need for our energy system, our electricity system here in the UK. And what is really disruptive about, in particular, hyperscalers, but actually all the way down to edge computing, co-located computing, is that they can build much faster than any other shovel-ready type project that we are used to having. So that doesn't really fit with our current generation queue, which was actually set up for forms of generation. And then that poses challenges for distribution, transmission companies, and how are they going to be powered? And are they going to shortcut? Are they going to go for private wires? Are they going to look at alternatives? Because maybe they don't all have green credentials. Maybe some of them are looking to be powered by gas. Maybe some of them are actually looking at diesel as an alternative. So I think there is a bit of practicalities, and it's something we've been spending a lot of time with at National Grid, is really how do we actually connect them faster, noting that if you put somebody else out of the queue, what does that actually mean? And luckily the government is actually recognising this and thinking about it from a strategic demand and sort of AI growth zones, but we haven't solved that problem yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as a disclaimer, I'm not rah-rah AI, but I did want to throw it out there.
If we continue along that line, what are the biggest barriers to accelerating the energy transition? And is it a barrier to be operating in the US, Saleh?
Yes and no. I'll first kind of reject the question because I think even that question inspires hesitation, timidity. It's this big daunting thing, the energy transition, and I am a bite-by-bite person. And so more often than not, we work with corporations, not with governments. And so for me, the biggest challenge that I have to overcome is mostly cognitive. Sometimes it's literally just a bad word. The word decarbonization in the US, depending on what state you're in, will immediately make anything you say thereafter be unheard by the recipient. And so for us, it is both about finding cost-effective things that are available today, and there's so much of that. It's actually 35% of the kind of electrification of the US is available through sustainable and more cost-effective paths than the status quo. And so for us, it's about elevating those for a corporation that either may not be looking into it, may not have the resources to deploy it, maybe they have a cost of capital issue, and so we would have to work with the likes of an HSBC or otherwise, and figure out not only what things are available, but which one to prescribe, because there's also a paralysis of choice. I think so often we talk about MAC curves, and I love them. We use them internally, or we talk about the 27 different projects that we need to elevate, but then you have effectively postponed any action because now there's an evaluation process that goes through it. And so for us, the biggest thing we do is to just actually reject the question and make it as small as possible. oh, you have very outdated furnaces, let's replace your stack melters. That'll make you $600,000 per stack melter a year, and I can find you a financer so that you make money on day one, right? And so less so energy transition, more like energy step is kind of what we take, and it's been very fruitful. I would say even in the US, where we may have lost some of the subsidies for the economic transition, we've also seen a spike in energy costs, and so it's kind of different sides of the scale, right? Incentivizing action or decentivizing inaction, and this administration, for better or for worse, is decentivizing inaction.
Yeah. It's inspiring to hear. But Tim, do you want to add on to that? What are the biggest barriers, or are you just pulling down the barriers in your position?
So I think there are some significant barriers. I think they're less significant in some ways than, if you go back 10 years and you look at the cost of some of these technologies, that was the biggest that was the biggest barrier, right? And I think in many cases, in pretty much all cases, that's in a better place than it was. I guess I'm going to do three as well, like a consultant. But the first one is grid, and obviously national grid government are very, very focused on that. I think we're making real progress, but not just in the UK, but more widely. It's really hard to build an electricity system on this scale while decarbonising and while fundamentally changing the nature of it, and that's clearly going to be a key constraining factor. The second is supply chains. Do we have the scale and volume in those supply chains? When we look, we're the world's biggest trade bank, right? We work across supply chains and have done for 150 years. A lot of those supply chains take decades to build up. What we're trying to do here is to kind of replicate that, but in 3, 5, 10 years for many of these supply chains. Those are fundamental differences. They need different port infrastructure. They need different financing solutions, etc. So I think that's a huge challenge. I think there are solutions to it. We've got a lot of doing a lot of work with our clients to think about how we can do that better and how we can finance that better. But the third, I think, is uncertainty, and partly that's about geopolitics and some of the things that we've talked about already. But I think really what it's about is, first of all, kind of what do I need to do? If you're a householder, if you're a small business, if you're a large corporate, what actually does this look like for me? In particular, we haven't really changed the way we use electricity for best part of 100 years, right? You turn the light on, you switch the switch, the light comes on, you don't really care where the electrons come from. Whereas actually now a much more active demand side, fundamental changes in the way that we use energy. I think that's a big challenge. People don't know quite what to do, and obviously part of our job is hopefully helping them to navigate that. But really crucially, when do I do it? If you think about just as a consumer, when should I buy an EV? Should I buy it when my current car needs replacing, or do I wait until the next time because actually the technology cost is coming down a bit and the innovation's happening so quickly that I'm worried about a stranded asset? So actually trying to figure out when to make those investments in a context of cost uncertainty, usually in the right direction as costs come down, but also in policy and economic uncertainty. I mean, that can be a big challenge. And again, one of the things that we're trying to do with our clients is to try and help them to navigate that. What do you need to do? When do you need to do it? To your point, what does the return on capital look like, and how quickly has that changed as the cost of these technologies shift? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So changing tone a bit and going into real life examples. Andrew, you work with industries, some energy intensive industries. Can you give us an example of a company or a sector that has made real progress in shifting towards cleaner energy, and what made it possible?
Yeah, I'm actually going to talk more about the way companies are organized initially, and then maybe we can talk about some technologies. But what I have seen be successful is those organizations that have really pulled their sustainability, their purchasing, their finance teams together around this energy line item topic and approach it from a global perspective, which sounds easy if you say it fast enough, but on the flip side, I've also seen a lot of companies that continue to manage their energy purchasing in a decentralized manner. And I think the companies that are making the most progress are those that are following that centralized approach, doing a lot of work on stakeholder management, being prepared to bring external expertise into the organization, collaborating with consultancies and with supply chain, and defining a kind of master plan that they're prepared to continually revisit and access the projects and solutions as they become available. And I think what we're seeing in the market, and I think again, I think we talked about it a lot here. The whole energy transition topic needs reframing somewhat. This is not about meeting decarbonisation targets. We talked about energy security and geopolitics. Renewables are a solution. They're a solution to helping businesses stabilise their energy costs. They're a solution to helping customers get access to grids. And I think the corporates that I am seeing being successful in implementing decarbonisation projects are really approaching it that way. So yeah, I'll probably pause there, bring some colleagues into that.
Can you comment on that, Saleh? Because you also work with the companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to think of some of the most common projects that we deploy, which are going to come off as completely not rocket science and technologies from a decade ago or so, but penetration of these technologies is often much lower than we'd like. We have a philosophy at Gravity where beyond kind of automating this process of collecting all the relevant energy data, which for the most energy intense is usually in a much more easily digestible format than if you go to an office company that might not have smart meters and telematics systems and otherwise. We pull all of that in, and rather than just for a single client try to find something that's relevant for them, we try to find a project that is shared across a multitude of different clients so that we can actually effectively act like a wholesale purchaser and bring on discounted rates for them that they couldn't facilitate if they went direct to the provider, because we're buying it on behalf of 700 different facilities. And so that's one thing is, I'd say both tactical, and I'll come to specific technologies. Tactically, we're trying to aggregate demand and have some of the kind of economies of scales that large enterprises or nations get to benefit from, but mid-market corporates that occupy supply chains don't get to have access to. And so when we do that, we find that many of them need retro commissioning, or many of them need capacitor retrofits so that when they connect to the grid, their power factor is actually aligned in a meaningful way. And then they can actually from there start to deploy battery energy storage and work with demand response systems. And it ends up being a fairly replicatable path across over half of our clients. And so maybe some of the most exciting win stories is we have successfully kind of found a number of different organizations that benefit massively from taking advantage of the fact that they are on a grid that's very highly demanded of. And so demand response paired with battery energy storage not only gets them a check from their utility provider, but allows them to use off-peak energy, which is much cleaner than the peak energy, which has to tap into these dirtier energy sources. And so we do that rinse and repeat. It's very replicatable. The math of it is common sense. The CFO gets really excited, and somebody who may have been a naysayer before ends up being an evangelist for batteries, which is fantastic.
So this is the cue for opening up the floor to the audience. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes, I'm very, very subtle when I emerge on the side of the stage. The problem is when you have a panel with so many good speakers, the time disappears very, very quickly. So first question was down here.
Hi, thanks for the good discussion here. I'm Prakash from Ramboll Singapore office from Asia. I didn't hear anything about you talk about the green hydrogen, because in the Asia and Singapore we are talking more on the green hydrogen roadmap, or how the green hydrogen can help on the decarbonizing the grid. How is it in Europe and UK? Do you see that green hydrogen feasibilities in the near future? Thank you.
Who wants to grab the Abbie?
We no longer own any gas assets here in the UK.
Okay.
So I think hydrogen, certainly in the UK and Europe, I guess, go back 15 years, no one was really talking about it. Go back 5 years, it was all anyone was talking about. I think now we've got a pretty pragmatic and I think proportionate view of hydrogen, which is that I think it does have an important role to play in decarbonisation of some bits of the energy system, in particular the bits where electrification is challenging for a whole host of reasons. I think obviously in the UK, sorry, I have to remember, I don't work for the government anymore, but the government is doing a bunch of things to try and incentivise green hydrogen projects. I mean, the key challenge is around costs, clearly, because it has a way to come down the cost curve. And secondly, around offtake, because there's just that kind of chicken and egg problem that trying to get off-takers to commit while the price is high is very difficult, but to get the price down, you need the off-takers to commit. So I think it does have a really important role. We certainly work with clients in the transport sector, in the heavy industrial sector, who are absolutely looking at that as a solution, and I think it will develop over time, but really as a complement to wider electrification.
Thank you, Tim. We'll take our next question at the front here.
Thank you very much. My name is Ash from Forrester Research. My question is for you, Abbie. You spoke about the privilege of the national grid. Essentially, you guys hold the keys to improving the renewable mix for the UK. So what are the biggest strategic levers you guys are putting right now to enable more renewables to come through the national grid? Is it storage? Is it decentralization? What are you guys doing?
So thank you very much. I should also do a bit of more of an education session. That another part of our restructuring our portfolio last year was that we actually sold off the electricity system operator. So the system operator is now actually owned by the government, and we are all therefore consumers of that and beneficiaries of that. And it's now been rebranded as the National Energy System Operator. So it's within their gift to do a number of things. So one is around strategic planning. So what does the planning need to look like? Not just for electricity and the electricity superhighways, but also down to the regional levels. That's also across gas as well, and then thinking about the hydrogen economy. So how do those all come together? Then it's actually about what's the markets. So coming back to the point that was mentioned earlier beforehand, there's been a long consultation for multiple years thinking about the review of the electricity markets and what does that actually mean for the UK. So they actually manage the markets. So what does that mean from balancing, from demand, from making sure there's flexibility services, for sort of inertia and various different things to make sure it's always happening at the right time. And then also then the real-time maintenance of the grid. So, but that's also at the transmission level. So we have a system operator for our distribution company. So that's much more down to the local levels, down to individual homes and households. So coming back to the question there for what's the strategic levers that we actually have, well, we committed to a huge amount of investment, 30 billion in the UK, 30 billion in the US, to be able to meet that rise in demand, basically build as infrastructure as quickly, as effectively, safely as possible, and to make sure that we come in on time and on budget. Part of the challenge has been that plan was actually committed to before the government came and said, we need you to expedite a number of projects. And coming back to the earlier challenges beforehand around supply chain, that doesn't make it easy. And geopolitics, tariffs, has also made things a lot more of a challenge as well. So there are particular levers that we are committed to. When we put things into a business plan, we actually have to adhere to that. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to be fully funded as part of our regulation. But it's really then stating that this is really important. Right? We have sweated the assets for decades. We have underinvested. If we had actually invested at previous times, the cost would have been cheaper, and also we would be financially better off. So there is no point of actually us now delaying any further and building things out like interconnectors, which is actually a non-regulated part of our business, but it does help with that flow of electricity surplus and demand and supply across Europe and ourselves, really can help this country, because what we're trying to do is lower the cost of electricity and energy. Something that we've been skirting around the topic of affordability, but it's not just affordability for consumers, it's also for businesses, and we have some of the highest costs in the UK compared to other G7 countries. So those are things we need to do by getting ourselves away from international exposure to gas.
I'm going to be greedy because I want to get do we have 2 minutes or are we very strict?
We are right up on time.
Okay, then I'm
going to
ask for 30-second takeaway message from each, if that's okay.
Well, you're the host of this session,
yes,
so absolutely. Apologies.
So what should business leaders be doing now? One action, you get 30 seconds. Tim.
I think for business leaders, the key thing is thinking about their customers. That's definitely what we're trying to do, is think about actually where are my customers now, where are they going to be in 1, 3 and 5 years. We work with a huge range of businesses across the UK who are really, really focused on this because their customers are, whether that's B2B or business to consumers. So I think really understanding where your consumers are now, where they're going to be in 3 to 5 years, and then thinking about what does that mean for my business and for my transition plan.
Perfect. 30 seconds. Go.
The energy transition is not about meeting targets. It's about building resilient and sustainable businesses, and business leaders who embrace that get to define the energy transition and benefit from it.
Nice. 20 seconds. That was perfect.
So I have 40.
Yes. Yeah. No, wait.
Yeah, I have 40. No, I was just going to say, first of all, thank you guys. I'm not typically the optimist on stage, but I feel like today was a rare moment where I was. With my remaining 30 seconds, I was going to say, make the problem palpable. If you're a large company who was afforded the luxury of being advanced when it came to transitioning and had wide enough margins that you maybe help the cost curve come down, incentivize your supply chain. If you are one of those members of the supply chain that's daunted or even annoyed by the fact that you're being asked to do something while there's tariffs flying left and right, you have labor issues and otherwise, come talk to us. There is a bite-sized way to go about this, and it will only make sense. It will never be something that goes outside of the swim lane you're already in. This is an achievable problem if you look at it with a 6 to 18 month horizon rather than a decade one. People do have to look at the decade level, but as an enterprise, shrink the timeline.
Thank you.
Collaboration. We cannot do this by ourselves alone. I don't just mean us as a company, I mean all of us together. We must be able to tap into the ingenuity, the solutions, the creativity, because we've never been through this particular challenge beforehand. And our future generations will thank us because we are tapping into those creative ideas, those solutions, rather than just fixating on the short-term problems.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
Abbie, I did think that was going to be the ultimate mic drop answer. Just one word, collaboration, drop the mic, walk off. I'm afraid we are up on time. Apologies for the questions we couldn't get to. I was thoroughly put in my place by the guest moderator, which I absolutely love. But a huge thank you to the whole panel, to Abbie, to Saleh, to Andrew, to Tim, and to our guest moderator, Ingunn Gunnarsdóttir. Thank you all for your time and joining us here on this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.